Hello, everyone. My name is Parvez Alam, and welcome to today's talk show and commemoration for Avijit Roy. I think you already know about Avijit. Today is the anniversary of his death. Uh, in 2015, this day, Avijit Roy was murdered in a Bangladeshi book fair, which we called the Ekushe Book Fair in Bangladesh. It's like the biggest literary event in Bangladesh. It was a horrible night for those who knew Avijit or who read his writings. I myself grew up reading his as a teenager, and he was kind of a hero to me. Although when I was a bit older, we disagreed on many things. When this whole thing happened, we were already in the middle of a debate for a few months. Uh, in Bangladesh, Avijit Roy was leading a movement called free thinking or free thought. In Bangladesh, it's called like Mukto Monad, those who are free thinkers. So he was leading a free thinking movement since the late 90s and in the early 2000s, which influenced many young people to be more critical about religion and the religious establishment in the country, which was a movement that was, I would say, necessary at the time. But at the same time, it was also internationally not a very safe time because you know that there was the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq. There was a lot of anti-Islamic discourses that was developing, and some of the Western atheistic writers, whom we until a certain point respected as being a voice of reason, turned out to be like producing the kind of discourses that kind of legitimizes war on terrorism and occupation on many different countries. So things become more complicated. And I personally believe that if the world was different, if, I mean, we had only our own society and culture where we could debate about these things and, find a way where freedom of expression is not something that can be misused by any big political forces to discriminate against other people and only be freedom for those who are speaking their mind. But that didn't happen because there were many different kind of forces at play, and that also cost the life of Avijit, I would say. And that kind of like put a country like Bangladesh in a direction which is not the direction of a freedom, like a free country. It's the direction of a country where the government is playing now the role of Assad, kind of, like they show the West that we're the power against terrorism and everything, but they kind of have a dictatorship there. So, like we, for the last 7 years, I mean, 2015 was a time after Avijit. There were many other authors who got killed, many others who had to be in exile, also people like me. But since then, we also faced other questions since we came here. Like as soon as we were here, there was this case with Geert Wilder. There was a case against him, and some people were defending his free speech. So these were the questions that we were facing at the time. Like, what is the limit of free speech, and when does something become hate speech, and how do we prevent the intolerant discourses to claim that they are simply speaking they're simply expressing their freedom of thought. That's what we were trying to figure out. And so that was one of the questions that we had in the Freedom Book Fair when we started it. And since we had a couple of years of hiatus of this book fair, we decided to commemorate Avijit today. Commemorate Avijit today, and at the same time go back to this question again. And so that's the whole goal of today's talk show. Please do feel free to ask me any question if I've missed something or if I've engendered any curiosity. But at this moment, I would like to go to the speakers, and I would go to Bonna Ahmed at first. Bonna and Avijit was there that night together. She also was wounded, lost her finger in that attack. And so But since then, I would say Bonna have been a true fighter, especially on the international arena. And I think her biggest strength is she never got lost in any kind of one-sided, simple narrative or discourse, which happened to many of our other friends, especially those who call themselves atheists or free thinkers. This is what happens when there is blood, when there is conflict. People become more polarized, and it's easy for them to accept simple narrative. But that didn't happen with Bonna ever. She was always taking the questions seriously, taking the question of freedom seriously, which is one of the main theme of the Freedom Book Fair, I would say, which we started in 2016 and 17, and now we want to relaunch it again. So I would go to Bonna, and also tell us about like what I like. It's also I also would also tell her to reflect on the current world situation. I mean, not a lot have changed in the last 7 years. It didn't. It's not like people become less polarized. It's not like people became less prone to accepting simple narrative. Rather, we can see that now it's very difficult to separate between the East and the West in terms of believing in conspiracy theory, following very ultra right wing politics and also mix it up with religion. I mean, look at East Europe. East Europe do have a serious neo-Nazi problem at this moment, and I get the whole West is kind of in America. You have things like QAnon, like mixing up with Protestant theology, and there is this. I mean, what is the difference with their ideology and the ideology of Islamic State? There is difference, but at the same time, there is a lot of similarity, and this is the question we need to face now. And how? So my question to Bonna is, how do we, get away from accepting simple narrative, but at the same time empower a discourse of freedom? And what do you think is, or what are the locations that we should look into in order to figure that out? So, to Bonna.
Thanks, Purpose. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thanks for arranging it. But I have to say sorry first because I'm not feeling very well. And I normally do not do anything on this day because I'm kind of unable to do anything on this day. I kind of freeze, and losing that finger wasn't a big deal comparing to everything else that happened. Like, I have the 4 machete stabs on my head and get constant migraines from it. Like, I have a constant migraine for last few days that I cannot get rid of. It sometimes feels like I can control my mind, but I cannot control my body. So anyways, I thought 7 years is a long time and it will be fine. This is the first time that I agreed to do something or talk anywhere on this day. And, but maybe not. Anyways, so going back to your question, and it's a very simple question, but I think we as human society have actually struggled with this for the longest time you can think about, all through human history, because it's very relative, right? What is a simple narrative, really? It's a subjective thing, because what is simple narrative today might not be a simple narrative tomorrow. What is simple narrative today for one society might not be a simple narrative for another society. Right. And that's why things like, justice, I have been actually dealing with this or struggling with the whole notion of justice for last 7 years. Everybody says, if this happens, then you get justice. I really don't know. I still can't figure out what is justice, to be honest. But going back to the simple narrative, it's very interesting because yesterday when I actually posted something, just something funny, because, people who tries to get in deeper and try to understand the human societies from the essence of it, cannot actually dwell into these kind of simple narratives. It's not possible. So when I posted something, we feel very helpless. There's nothing we can do other than just voicing our opinions when something like this happens, right? I protested when America invaded Iraq or Afghanistan, with those kind of narratives. So I posted something. I tried to be, sarcastic. I said, at least America is compelled to make up something that Saddam has chemical weapons before they invade a country. Emperor Putin doesn't even need to do that. He can just go and invade. And, I thought, seriously, it has to be very naive of me, Parvez, that I thought that it's very obvious, right? Invading an independent country where people are saying, we are independent country, we don't need any influence from you. It's very obvious that we should actually protest this kind of invasion. But to my surprise, I don't know, I'm still awestruck. I don't understand this. But tons of Bangladeshi, fellow Facebookers came and started saying that this is a valid invasion. I don't know what is a valid invasion, because what they're trying to say is now Russia is going to show the West, what it means. And some people actually went to the great length saying, we want destruction of Europe and America. So this is the revenge. I really don't understand this because I think people are so used to thinking one way or the other. The way Bush said, I don't know if you remember, in 2001 or 2, he said, either you are with us or you are with them. And I think our societies actually intentionally try to propagate this kind of simple narratives because this is easy. It's easy to convince public that either you are with America or you are with Russia. You are either with the West or with the East, but that's not how it works because human history is complicated. And you don't have to be either with this side or that side. You can actually be with both sometimes, or you can actually be with none. You can protest all kinds of wrongdoings, anything that actually hurt people. And, there is violence and it's hurting people and going against people's will should be protested. And I'm still trying to deal with this, that to a lot of Bangladeshis, and they call themselves the left, so-called left. I don't even understand. I don't even know if they understand the meaning of being, left, or they ever read anything, any literature. They understood what it means, right? Because if they think America or China is still a socialist country, they don't know what socialism is. Because these are just state capitalism, right? There is no socialism in these countries. And Russia right now is the most autocratic country in the world, who is suppressing freedom of speech, who's suppressing their people, who's suppressing their opposition. And I just don't know how people can actually accept something like this. But I really think that it has been done intentionally. I'll just tell you something today about the TEDx that I did, the talk that I did, which the title of that talk was "Simple Narratives Are Dangerous." You know what happened? Ted actually told me that I should talk about the incident, like what happened and how I was impacted and all that. And I said, look, I cannot just talk about that. I don't want it to be a Oprah kind of talk where I'm coming and just showing my emotions, because to me this is complicated. This is not something easy, because even when I have been impacted this way, I still don't see it as black and white. There is more to it. So when I brought in the politics in it and how I see it, that it's not a simple narrative, there is more to it, and there's so much politics in it, they said, oh, look, you are just making your talk too complicated. And normally TED picks up the good talks from like TEDx and other people, like all these talks that you do internationally. And they said, TED will not take this talk because you are making it too complicated. I said, I don't care, because I cannot stand in front of the international community and not speak about this side of the story, that this is not black and white. We need to understand, we need to go deeper on things. And I think these kind of simple narratives are dangerous. So they actually sent me an email. It went for back and forth for 3 months. At the end, they actually sent me an email and said, it's fine, go ahead, do it. But we are afraid that TED will never pick it up. So the reason I'm telling you this is because I think these kind of simple narratives, which are very, very dangerous, either you are this way or that way, is actually I think these are spread in our society by the powerful people, by all the politicians and others intentionally, because it serves a purpose.
Yes, exactly. I mean, what is happening? Oh, yeah, that's what is happening. I mean, every country and every region has its own conflict, but it seems like some of the big powers in the world who always talks about freedom and democracy, but what they do is just only care about their business and that like weapon business, oil business, and they just care about their own interest and just talk about
the
democracy.
world is run by corporate economy,
Yes,
right?
yes,
There is nothing
yes.
else to it.
Yes, and who suffers? Like people of, let's say, Syria, and now people
of
Ukraine,
Ukraine, people of Syria, right?
Yeah, general people, or even people of Bangladesh. I mean, like
Right.
all the political Islamism and the Islamophobic discourses that kind of spread all over the world that also affected our own life. And this is why we're discussing this. I'm very happy that you brought the example of Bush about either you're with my side or or at my opposition side.
Or the other side,
yeah. I would actually go back to that with Yannicka later after Typhoon, because for me it's a very interesting example, because that also shows about the problem of simple narrative, because we kind of tend to believe that it's only the Muslim countries or the politicians or the terrorist who uses quotes from religious book and use that on behalf of violence and war. But that's not the true. Bush was quoting Bible. He was quoting Jesus and kind of, legitimizing his war. And then the question is, did we ever compare Bush with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi? We didn't. And this is a question we need to ask. Why does it look like that, like the Muslim are only doing it, but the West is not, and the West is only fighting for democracy and freedom, and there is no question of religion or theology there? So this is a problem with simple narrative. Like if we look into it properly, we realize that a simple narrative is just a narrative. It doesn't give us the whole picture. So thank you for your speech, and I also told you that it's fine. I mean, I understand that this is a day which is not really a good day for you, especially to start in a talk show. But I'm really glad that you are here and you at least kind of started today's event, because we're looking forward to, after today, kind of resurrecting the book fair again. So thank you.
Thank you, Parviz, for arranging it. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Now going to first go to Typhoon. Yes, yes. I mean, yeah, it's so Bona, feel free to stay or go, okay?
I will drop off. Thank you,
Okay,
Purvis.
okay. So I will go to Typhoon, but in my, I'm actually going to go back to something that actually I was having a discussion with Typhoon a few days ago about about Islam in the West. And Typhoon was also talking about the simple narrative thing. I mean, like, we're not using the term simple narrative, but Typhoon was saying that, yeah, if it, like, when it comes to, let's say, Islamophobia, it always gets less importance than anti-Semitism, which is generally connected with the hatred of Jewish people. So for Typhoon was saying, like, the situation is like this, that Islamophobia, whether there is Islamophobia or not, is already a contested thing, and it doesn't always get, like, very good support from the government. But on the other hand, you can see that when it comes to anti-Semitism, it's very difficult for someone to be an anti-Semite and get out of any kind of legal persecution. But if you can be Islamophobic and get out of legal persecution, so which is happening here.
Exactly, yes.
And my question to Typhoon was a difficult one. Do you want Islam also to become another religion like that in the West? Or if not, what would be the solution, do you think? Like,
what do you mean exactly by when Islam is becoming another religion like that?
What I'm just saying, like, sometime if you just criticize the state of Israel, it can happen that some people would say you're an anti-Semite, and it's a fact. It is happening pretty regularly.
Exactly.
So do you want also Islam having that kind of establishment in the West that anybody who criticizes, let's say, a homosexual person who is, this is a question that problem is, Muslims are minorities here, and then there are other kind of minorities, let's say, like minorities of sexual orientation.
Exactly,
and
yes.
that creates always a problem. I mean, I remember when we did the book fair for the second time back in 2017, there was we had the same discussion, like where does freedom of expression ends and where hate speech starts. And one thing we were like kind of sure that Marlos, the professor from Tilburg, she actually mentioned something very important, that if the hate speech is done by a majority population, a powerful population against a minority population, it is very easily hate speech. It can be identified as. But it's much more difficult when a minority person is saying something that could be hateful, but, you know, that person doesn't have the power to, you know, like really persecute other people. But when both communities are minority, you know, like minorities like Muslim minority, Jewish minority, you know, there is also like anti-Jewish hatred among certain radical or like right-wing Muslim population, and the same with anti-Muslim among the, you know, more radical.
Yeah, the comparison I made is that here in the West, in the Netherlands, we are very aware when talking about anti-Semitism that we cannot tolerate this, that this is, we should not do this, we should not go into this road. We say never again. And this has, of course, to do with the history of the Netherlands and the history of the Holocaust. But when it comes to Muslims, you know, you just have to reframe, you know, the text with Muslim and Jews, and you will see that there is much more tolerance to anti-Muslim or Islamophobic discourse. And this is something which is, you know, an unequal thing. And I see that a lot of times. And and this hurts people, because if we see here in the Netherlands, it's institutionally, people with a headscarf cannot join the forces. They cannot become a police officer. But we don't have institutional anti-Semitism because of the history. So when you write an Islamophobic book, as Lale Gül did with I'm Gonna Live, this will become a bestseller. And I still think, okay, it's her free speech, but I still think if the things what she said about Muslims in this book, if you change that with Jews, that would be something, I think the whole book would be cancelled. And
even if written by a Jewish person?
Sorry?
Even if it was written by a Jewish, like someone from a Jewish family?
I don't know, but it wouldn't be a bestseller. It would be the way it's received also says a lot about the Netherlands. And it's a book which corroborates, the views we have about Muslims, which is really Orientalistic. And so the comparison is that we see that not all, groups here in the Netherlands, which are both minorities, are not treated equally. And I think a lot of people here in the Netherlands see that, and it's frustrating. And it also comes from a place of segregation. People, we live here more than 50, 60 years, and we still don't know each other. So I think we have a lot to do in that sense. And so that's about this question. And I also want to react on Bonya's story about the whole invasion that's going on now in Ukraine, and that people see this as a valid invasion, which is, of course, I understand also where this comes from. When Bush said, when he invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, and he said, "You're with us or with the terrorists," there was no freedom in that.
One thing to mention, just look into the cover of Economist of today and the time of Bush, like when Bush was attacking Iraq. Very different cover. One is waging peace, another is how far would this evil guy go?
Yes, I'm totally against this invasion of Russia, of course, and it's Russian nationalism, imperialism, but it is also linked to the war on terror that the West waged in Iraq, in all over the world with these drone attacks. Because what happened after 9/11 and this invasion, all kinds of autocrats like Bush, like other people, they all started to wage their own war on terror. They used this whole discourse about terrorism, and they sometimes joined, with America in all these other countries. So what we see is still the effect of what happened after America invaded all these countries. And also in Turkey you have a war on terror, you have in Syria a war on terror, you have in Russia now a war on terror, 10 years a war in Syria, and we didn't stop Putin there in 2013 after Assad attacked Ghouta with his chemical attacks. And I think that moment was for Russia very important. Now, if that made him stronger, and now he can just invade another country without these whole excuses of what America did with this weapons of mass destruction. So, and this is the complexity which Bonya also referred to about this whole deadlock system we are into. Someone can invade another country and you can have half of the whole world with you saying this is a valid invasion. And we should, of course, use our free speech to come with our version of our opinion of what's happening, and also be aware of hate speech, and also say this, we cannot tolerate this. About that, which is from Forum for Democracy, which is seen as a fascist party, anti-Semitic party, Islamophobic party, and I think it is also all these things. He can, freely say, "Yeah, I'm with Putin," and he's not seen as a traitor. But Muslims are seen as the fifth column. They're part of the long arm of Erdogan. All these things we heard about Turks or other minorities or Muslims, we don't apply this to all these people we have given spaces in the Netherlands, like Wilders, Baudet, and all these other fascist groups. So we are in this very bad situation of polarization, but we have to we have to open this kind of discussions also, so that people can understand and don't copy paste. This is a valid invasion. All these things, when I talk with, of course, they are like saying what Erdogan is saying what Putin is saying, all these state propaganda. And it is important that we should also come with another version of our history and also what's going on in the world.
Yeah, I'll just ask a couple of more questions related to what you just said. I remember in 2017, in this similar kind of discussion, as I said, like a demarcation was made between the minority and majority in terms of deciding what is a free expression and what is hate speech. And now we can see that even that is not easy, because you can have like more than one minorities, and there might be some kind of inequality there, which is also reasonable, because there is every country has its own historical context also that it takes for granted in deciding what is hate speech. Like the N word in America is a hate speech, and there are still many countries in the world who would probably not understand this historical dimension, like this is cultural historical dimension, and Europe has a Holocaust in that case, and so that would always be an important factor in dealing with anti-Semitism. But at the same time, we know that this is also being misused by politically powerful forces, and that's where my question is also, like when we're talking about, like, before I go to Yeneka, this would be my question to you. I mean, one thing that I've realized ever since coming here, I've met a lot of like second generation Muslims here. I always understood their political urgency, the urgency of vocalizing the kind of inequality that they face because they're born here, people like you, who are kind of vocal against discrimination. But and the fight against Islamophobia comes from that perspective.
Yeah.
It comes from a liberal, progressive perspective. But the problem is, I realized that you guys never developed your own narrative in a way that separates you from any other person who would, speak against Islamophobia. Some people can just speak against Islamophobia just to protect their own discriminatory view. And I thought that, and one of the reason I thought that you guys lack narrative, I'm not saying that because you guys need to create a liberal narrative, but I realized that you don't also touch Islam, like,
Exactly.
You
and
don't touch Islam, you let it be interpreted by only certain group of people. And do you think it's a good idea to not touch Islam and let only
we should touch
far
Islam.
right?
Yes. I'm also a journalist, so I spoke with a Jewish student in from Maastricht or Utrecht University, and because there is now in the Netherlands a case going on from the Rights Forum, and they want to know what the relation is between Israeli universities and Dutch universities. They want to see how much Israel has influence here in the Netherlands. And but you see, there are some parties in the Netherlands that say, no, you cannot do that. That's anti-Semitism. They just want to shut them out and don't do this research. While in the Netherlands, we have a lot of research about, looking how much connections are between Turkey, with Saudi Arabia, with everything. And then you don't hear it. This is Islamophobia. But beside that, I said to him, when you hear these things, that is anti-Semitism, and that when you start this research, people say Jewish students in the universities don't feel safe anymore because of this research. And he said, yeah, I'm a Jewish student, and I feel safe. I don't feel safe about, what they are doing, creating this whole hysteria. And another thing, this is the point I'm getting at, he said they are anti-Semitic because their view of Israel, their view of what anti-Semitism is, and they want to impose their whole idea on also other Jewish people who are not, with their vision. So I think this is an interesting point, and we can learn as Muslims from this point of view, because we also have to say that what Erdogan is doing, or what other Muslim leaders are doing, is also Islamophobic, because they are imposing a view on Muslims, and that's the only narrative that they allow in Turkey, in all other places. And they put people in jails, Muslim people in jails, because they, come for their own opinion of freedom of speech. And this is also Islamophobic, because it is, you will only allow one narrative about Turkey, only one narrative about, Islam, and this is also Islamophobic, because, and I think this is an interesting point of view, that when we come up, and say we are discriminated in the Netherlands and, by non-Muslims, but we should also include in this story that there's a lot of internal Islamophobia, and if we don't talk about that, that's hypocritical.
Yeah, I can. Oh, sorry. I can see. Sorry, I can see your point. Although I would be kind of very reserved about calling those Islamophobia too, because for me that would be also getting into the trap again of simple narrative.
It's a complex way of.
A word like anti-Semitism can empower a lot of people, and you're probably thinking that the word Islamophobia can also be a very critical tool, but it might not. In any case, what I'm just, you have a question. We are actually going to be in a Q&A question after the discussion. Is that okay? But if you have any immediate question that you might forget, then we can do it. We're a bit informal. In that case, please, I'll try to remember. Yes. Yeah.
Anonymous. Okay. Is it okay like this?
Yes.
Well, first, thank you, and I think there's a lot of truth to what you've been discussing. I was just wondering, though, like, I totally agree that difference between how Islamic communities here are treated and anti-Semitism has a lot of historical and institutional context. But I was wondering, because there are a lot of different countries that are majority Islamic, right, in the world. But there's only one state that considers itself to be Jewish, right, which is Israel. So that's where the things between anti-Semitism and anti-Israeli opinions get a little muddy. And also I was wondering on your thoughts, like in the criticism of the state Israel, right? Sometimes you do hear that there's some of these old Jewish stereotypes come in, like saying like Israel's very sneaky, for example, you know what I mean? Like and then you hear that old stereotype of like the sneaky, slippery Jew that's always up to something in the way that Israeli government is doing something. So you're not. That's why it's good to stay away from those simple narratives, I feel, because you can say, I'm criticizing the state of Israel, but in what you're saying, you're kind of revoking some of those old stereotypes. So I would like to hear your view on that.
Thank you. I would like you to answer the latter, though. Is that
Okay, no problem. Yes, no problem. I will answer it, yes.
Because I'm pretty sure you're not going to forget. Because I wanted to first, have the discussion among us. After all the speaker, then it would be best to get into a discussion period. But yeah, I just want to end with one thing, is saying like, what I was just thinking when you're talking about Lale Gul, I didn't read her, but I heard about, her book. And the thing is, I have a friend like her back in Bangladesh who have become very popular. I also have dead popular friend like her. So the thing is, Lale Gul, people like Lale Gul doesn't come out of nowhere. They come out of a particular kind of discrimination in their own society. And if you are not ready to deal with that, then I'm thinking like fighting with Islamophobia is always going to like force you to get into a kind of simple narrative not constructed by you, but constructed by other people. And this is why I think like, I understand it's very difficult. I'm very frustrated. Sometimes I get very frustrated about my Bangladeshi atheist friend because I've been writing about other versions of Islam for years, and I've been hated. I've been hated by people because they think I'm kind of giving the follower of a stupid religion a second life. Because they think if these people would lose their faith completely about their religion, everything would be fine. That kind of Islamophobic they are in their head. But I mean, what could I do apart from like, constructing my own interpretation or showing them, no, you guys are wrong, you guys are simplifying, you guys are essentializing, I didn't have any other, because there was also like a discussion during 2017 that are we going to solve this question by legally only, or shall we not try any legal recourse unless it's extremely necessary? I myself was on the second position that we shouldn't always look for legal recourse until we can solve this in a socially, in a social way, through dialogue, through understanding. It's never easy. It's going to take a lot of time, but I actually don't have any other answer to that. If you want to comment on that, please. Otherwise, I'll go to.
She has, of course, Lale Gul has the liberty to say what she wants, but we have also the liberty to say what she says is racist.
Yes, I agree. I do agree. I do agree, and I do the same with my friends too. If they say something racist, I tell them, look, what you're saying here now, you're probably thinking that, okay, I'm an atheist, so anything I say against religion is just critical. That's not the case. Sometimes what you're thinking critical is actually racist and discriminating. There is no doubt about that. But they need to understand that. If they don't, if they only see that when you're calling them racist, if they don't understand that why is it racist, then it's not going to help. It's just going to become a swear that fall out somewhere, not in the right place. Okay, so now I'm going to go to Yannicka. Because as I mentioned before, when Bonna was talking about like Bush's, I would say like misquoting Jesus and starting a war, and so my question to you, I'll summarize it in like two different questions. So one is there is in a recent time, would say like Christianity had a role to play. Not just Christianity, the whole Abrahamic religion had a role to play until the modern period. It stood for the oppressed, many different kind of oppressed group of people, Sikh people, throughout years. Both Christianity and also for the right of the slaves until the modernist colonialist period came, when religion was again used for the behalf of the ruling class, and even for discriminating and oppressing people, even on behalf of slavery. But now that has changed also. Like religion came under so much criticism in the West, it has lost its social power so much but then religion itself went through a lot of new kind of discursive phases that kind of was helpful for people of the modern time. But recently we've seen that religion, especially Christianity, have taken a step back too much, I would say. Because we have seen that like Christianity no longer speaks on behalf of love and humanity and is courageous enough to go against the political, and even sometimes, like, I know it could feel a bit controversial, but religion was never afraid of going against scientific discourses in the name of humanity. But religion no longer does that because it has become too controversial for it. So my question to you is, I mean, from your experience of your work, why do you think like Christianity has kind of failed to continue its to play its historical role in this time? And my second question would be, from that perspective, what do you also think about like the role of Islam in the society and the politics? Should it also have the similar? Should it also become like Christianity, take a step back, too far back, and let people like Bush only to use religion in a way that wouldn't be called terrorism and like religious politics, but as normal democratic politics serving the capitalist corporations of the world? If I've summarized the question correctly.
Thank you, Parvesh. I really like the way you ask questions, but I also feel I need a lecture of about 3 hours to really answer your question. And I think people will get bored if I do that. So also I want to thank Typhoon for inviting me here. I didn't really know what to expect, and I'm really honored to be here. Also honored to have the chance to listen to everyone. Also to Bonya and hear about the context I know very little of, but I'm also interested in. So to get to your question, and also I want to say I really like this idea of avoiding simple narratives. So I'm a theologian. I'm interested in Christianity in relation to colonialism, to gender and sexuality. So I think one of the big problems of Christianity in the West is that it has become such a simple, single narrative, as if Christianity is just one discourse, and all of the complexity and all of the variety and also all of the fights within the Christian tradition are somehow, nobody really recognizes that. And so I'm interested in showing the other narratives and the other voices. I don't think that Christianity did a step back as much as most Christians think it did, also in the Netherlands. So, for instance, right now, in our coalition, we have 2 Christian parties. And even our prime minister, who has endlessly been our prime minister, Mark Rutte, he's a Christian. He goes to church. So I would say that even if we see ourselves as a secular country, I mean, even the whole idea of secularism, especially in the West, came from a Christian understanding of religion. So, and maybe I should explain that. So the way, so I'm currently writing a book actually about Dutch identity and how it's intertwined with colonialism and with Christianity. So from the beginning, the Netherlands or the Republic, it came out of fighting Catholic Spain, and in that fight it also became a colonial power. And in being a colonial power, this kind of self-understanding came up where Dutch people thought that, a real Dutch person is a white Christian, a white Protestant Christian. And the main other, this is quite general in Europe, but it's also specifically for the Dutch context, the main other were Jews and Muslims. So there was this hierarchy. On top, the Protestant white Christian, this is the best religion. It's a private religion. It doesn't mingle with politics. That's that's better. Of course, I didn't realize that, yes, Christianity was very much mingling with politics, which is, of course, it did all the way to Bush and further. And then there were Jews and Muslims who were stepped down, and then there were Hindus and Buddhists, and then there were what they regarded as nature religions. So there's always been this hierarchy. So Jews were never seen as equal citizens, neither were Muslims. And now I think the position of Jews changed, although I think, so this is also in response to your question maybe, I think that even though there's so much focus on anti-Semitism, and sometimes too much, and there's obviously too little focus on Islamophobia, I don't think we really see how all of this is so much connected with our Christian history. So we, for instance, when it comes to anti-Semitism, we tend to blame Muslims but Christianity actually has this huge historical problem with anti-Semitism and also with Islamophobia. So I'm saying all of this to make clear that in our understanding of ourselves as a secular country, we think, religion should be a private affair. There should be no religion visible in public spaces. So this is why we become so nervous about Islam, because Islam is a religion that is very comfortable with being political, which I think is a good thing, actually. So I think it's this idea that Christianity isn't political is also just, it's not true. So now I come to Bush. So, the funny thing is, and when Bush says something like this, it's not really recognized as a religious narrative. But of course, it is a religious narrative. It is a very Christian narrative. It's a very Christian colonial narrative to think that as a white male Christian, Bush, a president of the United States, you kind of have the right to mingle in everyone's political affairs, and you kind of have the right to control the whole world. So I think that's very much a Christian colonial narrative that was, even though if it's not recognized, it's also appealing to European countries. So they would go along with it because they also see themselves as white people who come to bring civilization to other parts of the world. And this whole idea of bringing civilization is, of course, connected directly to colonialism.
I completely agree. I just remember, that's actually kind of like the last chapter of one of my book back in 2015, the last book I wrote in Bangladesh. The reason I was actually saying taking a step back has to do with like more recent institutionalized Christianity. I feel like it has become less critical of both capitalism and also like the state, the powerful states that kind of ruling it on behalf of capitalism rather than on behalf of God and humanity. Because they mainly trust the God in the dollar, like in God we trust. We trust in the God in dollar. It's more like that. I felt like that's probably perhaps my recent understanding, but I completely agree with you. Like, religion has been so much connected to Western politics. Even Bush is a religious person. There are quite a few books about the religiosity of Bush himself. And I remember Donald Rumsfeld was sending a lot of pictures of like Iraq war with quotes from Bible. Yes, it's more connected than we generally think about it. Yeah, but what should be the role of like you mentioned like if Christianity was a bit more political, that would have been probably better. But
well, if Christianity would be more aware that it actually is political and use this political side of religion in better ways.
But who is going to use it? Because at this moment you can see that the people who are using it are mostly either right-wing or fringe conservative communities kind of attracting certain religious group of people. That's an American story, probably not here that much. But I mean, well, one can say that in Netherlands there is a bit of liberal Christian or left Christian politics. But I mean, like, then who would actually reassert that ownership over Christianity? Do you think who should do it, and that can actually kind of improve our situation?
Well, I mean, right now I'm more interested in Muslims and Jews in Christian society, in Dutch society. So I'm more interested in the minority groups. And of course, there are also Christian minority groups. For instance, what we call migrant churches. But I think right now Christians are still so much stuck with the dominant narrative without realizing, for instance, the connection between Christianity and whiteness, that it's very hard for them to dismantle this narrative and to do things differently. So I think a lot of more revolutionary ideas are coming from the minority Christians and from Jews and Muslims. And of course, there are some radical Christian groups.
But if you can see, of course, the discussion about the slave trade and you see that the role of the church in the slave trade, you see that there is also a push also from black Christians to, change the whole narrative and also change the religion into a more, equal-based society. Mm-hmm. And I think that's also one source to assert power again. Now, power not in a negative sense, but power in the sense from claiming of...
In a necessary sense.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so I think we had the discussion just before we began, and I asked you if you consider yourself a secularist, and then you said, I consider myself a secularist because I don't want to leave secularism in the hands of people who currently consider themselves secularist. So I'm a Christian, yes, and because I don't want to leave Christianity in the hands of people who are currently calling themselves Christians, apart from, of course, Palestinian Christians I feel connected to, or other Christians like black Christians who are trying to transform.
But the same thing also applies to me. I took distance of Islam in 2004, but in 2013 I, made peace with Islam again, just because I saw that there are too many Muslims who, are exactly so.
Pretty same. I mean, I became an atheist when I was in high school, like 15 and 16. But I mean, I wasn't an atheist in that way. I became more of a spiritual person after. Well, I shouldn't go back there. It's too complicated. What I'm just trying to say is I wasn't claiming the Muslim identity until probably, let's say, 9, 10 years ago, because I realized the country was becoming so polarized, and only the very radical Muslim people are kind of claiming ownership of the Muslim identity, and that was a huge problem for me. And I started claiming a cultural Muslim identity. It was a bit safe because I thought in that way, certain group of Muslims are not gonna come and tell me, hey, you're not praying, or hey, you're drinking, this kind of stuff. So I was kind of feeling safe with the cultural Muslim identity. And nowadays, there are even people in Bangladesh who don't even let me take that identity because they think now there are so many cultural Muslims. They can't deal with all this.
But I think that is also Islamophobia, because these people have a certain view about what it is to be a Muslim, and they don't let other versions of being a Muslim be. So what can be more Islamophobic than that?
I kind of understand your question that way, because to tell you the truth, most Muslims in the world are like that. They don't have a really, strict sense of halal and haram in their every activities, which is a very priestly thing to do. And if we only let certain priestly group of people to decide what constitute a Muslim, well, obviously there are certain clerical group that would not agree with them either. Actually, most wouldn't, because these kind of theological discussions were there thousands of years ago. If you don't pray, do you become a non-Muslim? If you commit a grave sin, do you become a non-Muslim? And most part of the Muslim theologian would say no.
It started at a very early age because, when I went to the mosque and I was 5, 6 years old, I hated the question, why don't you do this? Are you not a Muslim? and you know, why don't you do this? Are you not a Muslim?
So you see how people like Laligul don't feel Muslim.
But you know, the person who's saying this to me is also 5, 6 years old, and then I'm like, you know, it's also the, you know, the will to dominate another person, you know, and that's important. And I always felt, you know, awful when I heard this question, and I thought, you know, you are putting me in a position which I'm not, you know, being a bad person, be a human. And I think we should not, you know, identify Muslim as being good or evil, or, you know, therefore we should claim the narrative of also of Islam, of Christianity, of secularism. You know, in 2007 we were at the anti-Trump demonstration, and you had some board with secular Muslim on it. That was really interesting. But yeah, I think that's the solution.
Yeah. Now I remember that. Oh yeah, now I remember that. Yes. Yeah, the whole secular Muslim. Why did I even write that? I mean, now if I think about it, because I realize that a lot of people even find it difficult to think that secular Muslim could go on the same phrase, you know?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
you know. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, but I think it's great. So in the eyes of many people who are not Muslims, they think they can recognize a Muslim by looking at someone. So they see a typhoon walking down the street, and they see him as a Muslim. So in that sense, Muslims are being racialized. Yeah. So it also means that you can never not be a Muslim, which is why I think we are so over-focused on Lale Gul, because, wow, she used to be a Muslim and she stopped being a Muslim. This is what we need. You know, it's also that kind of idea. At the same time, it's almost impossible not to be a Muslim, because there's so much stereotypes around the idea of being a Muslim. So in that sense, I like the idea of claiming yourself as a secular Muslim, doing something similar, but also actually reversing that.
Yeah, you know, also, you know, this, you said it's a bit strange to see a secular Muslim, but when we hear things like he's a secular Jew, then I think that's totally normalized. And so we see that
even atheist Jew and Christian atheist is normalized.
Yes.
Richard Dawkins called himself a cultural evangelist, and I can't call myself a cultural Muslim easily.
Yes, so it also has to do with the depiction of Muslims and the whole frame in the media, you know, this idea of there's just one type of Muslim, and he or she looks, like...
I just wanted to mention, after what you said, it's very difficult not to be a Muslim, and I know that from my heart, especially after coming here. Back in Bangladesh, it was much easier for me to not be a Muslim. But here it's not. Because if I am not a Muslim, I have to be an ex-Muslim. Why? Let me tell you, because I was not the only Bangladeshi writer who moved here back in 2015. There were 3 more. And so they are more connected to the Dutch humanist organizations like Humanistic Verbond. And I was also connected to them. They were also part of our book fair. But I know that they sometimes do discussion with the diaspora community who are like atheists from Muslim countries. And they actually call that an ex-Muslim gathering. So people who are atheists still having to carry that Muslim part, even if there's an ex before it, you know, I mean, it's like those people really wanna get out of Islam. I know they hate Islam, yet the only way they can do it here in a Dutch cultural political, you know, context is adding an X before their Muslim identity, like their lost Muslim identity.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting that, for instance, Thierry Baudet, he calls himself a cultural Christian. So he's kind of claiming that's also a way of being kind of a secular Christian, but it functions very differently, of course, because he claims this in order to to claim a certain superiority. I think that is also still connected to this idea of Christianity and also whiteness. So again, here's this idea of a real Dutch person is culturally Christian, is white, and all. So as soon as you're a Muslim, you can never be a real Dutch person.
So my last question to you would be like, since you are already like, you kind of made it clear that no, religion has its place in Netherlands still, and even in politics, even though we don't always see it as something like when Islam takes a political phase. We think it's too political, but in terms of Christianity, the relationship between Christianity and religion, we don't always see it. So, but my last question to you is, what do you think, like, the role of those who represent Christianity in Netherlands have in getting out of, in kind of taking the society away from the simple narrative that Islam is the only political religion there is and Christianity is not, while there is even like representation of Christianity in the parliament?
Yeah, so this is the second hour and a half of my lecture. So I think...
You can do that someone.
Okay, so I think, first of all, the term religion is very problematic and is also connected to colonialism. So this, I also want to maybe very quickly deconstruct this idea that there is something that is called religion and that there's another thing that is called secular.
It's a topic I love too, but we can talk.
Yeah, okay, so I think people have worldviews, and those worldviews have political implications, and they have long histories of inclusion and exclusion and very problematic. So I think the best thing to do is so we have this whole debate about Dutch colonialism now, and we are, I think, as white Dutch people, of which I'm one, we are trying to get a better understanding of this colonial past, which is, of course, directly related to our self-understanding. So what Gloria Wekker calls white innocence. So I think there's a specific form of, there's a Protestant phase of white innocence that is very strong in the Netherlands, a Christian phase. So I think what I really like to do as a Dutch Christian is just showing all the other narratives and just pointing out that that currently our government is quite Christian. It's quite Christian in how it looks at Muslims. It's, the whole toeslagenaffaire, unfortunately, this racism, systemic racism, has a relation to this Christian identity. So we have to, I think, just look at these, listen to people, look at these stories and understand how this is connected to our self-understanding and I think change that. Which is also, Christianity is a lot more interesting than this very boring single narrative. So there's a lot to discover also, I think.
Well, I'm glad that you managed to summarize that. Thank you. I think we should probably move into the Q&A session, the open discussion session.
There was a question unanswered.
Yes, so please answer that, then we'll ask other.
Yes, I think the first question was about that there is just one Jewish state and there are a lot of Muslim countries. That's true. And of course, Israel has the right to be a state, but the thing is, and I think you're mentioning to the power disbalance, but behind Israel, of course, there's a whole Western world which is supporting Israel. So I think when it comes to the unequal balance of power, you see that Israel is one on the powerful side. And the second part of your question I forgot, but maybe in the mic.
Well, the second part was basically about, I understand, of course, that criticism of the state of Israel is not in itself anti-Semitic, right? But yeah, I was just wondering how it goes because we've been talking about simple narratives, right? because sometimes in criticizing what the government of Israel does, you do hear some of those old stereotypes about Jews, you know, like they're being sneaky or slippery or whatever, and then things get a little messy.
Anti-Semitic, yeah.
Yeah. So I was wondering what your views are there.
Yes, so a lot of criticism about Israel is undoubtedly anti-Semitic. You know, they deny the right of Israel to exist, and when you see that, you have to just say that, you know, deconstruct that, and that's what we also do. But when it comes to, you know, criticizing Israel and, you know, put the label of anti-Semitic just to shut people up, you know, then, you know, go to that's not possible. You know, then you will end the discussion, and we should have the discussion about Israeli suppression of Palestinians. But of course, yes, there is a lot of anti-Semitism in the critique of Israel.
Can I answer?
Yes.
Yeah, so I agree with what you say, Typhoon, but I also think that there's a problem with Israel being a Jewish state. And so I also think, so there's a problem with ethno-nationalism and with states thinking that they exist to host only one kind of people, whether it's white Dutch Christians in this country or whether it's Jewish people in Israel. And also I think there's also a problem that some of the supporters of Israel are actually anti-Semitic, like Thierry Baudet, or like many others. Anyway, so there's also, it's quite complex actually, and it's on both sides, this complexity, I think.
I would also maybe add a little, although I'm trying to be very careful, because ever since I come here, I realized that even among my leftist friends, it's a highly controversial issue. In one of my birthday, I remember my friends group getting divided in two groups and fighting the whole night about this issue. But I just want to say one thing is, like, my personal opinion is perhaps we should not deal with this kind of problems from like presuppositions that some critic of Israeli state is a bit of stereotypical anti-Jewish. Because if we start from those presuppositions, it would always remain subjective. We would never be able to deal with an objective problem. I mean, because, you know, I face this problem with many Bangladeshi Islamists, you know. I'm criticizing one of the mullah. By mullah here, I mean the priest. I'm criticizing a priest, or maybe Islamist party, and they would say I'm being Islamophobic, you know, because it's stereotypical anti-Islam. And I think that way we would always fail to have a real discussion about the issue itself at hand. Because I remember it was not too long ago, one ambassador of Israel in Europe called in Twitter someone anti-Semitic. I don't remember whom, but I remember reading that tweet and the original speech that was termed as anti-Semite. It has nothing to do with any kind of portrayal of the state of Israel that would be stereotypically, you know, anti-Semite, but still that, you know, the government, the state, they, like, think about what like Russia is doing now, you know. The government officials have their own duty of defending their politics. And they use this kind of, you know, this kind of cultural advantage, or the empowerment of the historical, they get empowered by the historical context and misuse that on their behalf. So I think we should always deal with this question in a more particular way, like with specific particular case, rather than generalizing the whole case that, like, you know, that.
Yeah, we should deconstruct, you know, also what Russia is now doing. They say there was a genocide going on in eastern Ukraine, and, you know, they say they are Russophobic and everything. But, you know, you have to deconstruct, you know, you have to say what genocide is, and then show what's going on in Eastern Europe. And yeah, and that's the way, you know, and we should have space to do that. We should have also, you know, if you look at the television shows in the Netherlands, you know, it's totally a waste of, public money, and it's really, people who are sitting there, they should not sit there. They should have left these positions 10, 15 years ago. And it's, it's horrible, what we are seeing. And this is what the public is seeing. And then we ask why people are saying this is a valid invasion. They're just reproducing what they heard. And that's the whole problem. Also, the media has a huge responsibility herein. And yeah, we should claim these positions.
One thing is, something which is already deconstructed and have become meaningless is already a kind of dangerous thing. But what is more dangerous is when rehashing of meaningless rhetorics, rehashing of deconstructed rhetoric is being used over and over again. The West does it. I mean, even like, we know about what Russia is doing, but when you look into the American response to the Russian imperialism in the Eastern Europe, we realize that they were also always trying to have these old liberal discourses, they're rehashing them rather than really getting into the issue and trying to create a kind of narrative that kind of is an assemblage of all the parties put together. In that way, we maybe, if not peace, maybe we wouldn't be more close to peace, but it would probably be a bit far from war. That's my opinion. But in any case, I will open the floor for other questions.
I think we need to remember that most people that use religion, be it the Sauds of Saudi Arabia, the mullahs in Bangladesh or Iran, the evangelical movement in the United States, Benjamin Netanyahu, they use it as a means to an end. They're not ideologues themselves. So I think we need to also reframe that, because it's of course it's easy, because we as humans, we had the deep need to understand things in a simple narrative. And I think also if we are from the opposition, then we need to use sometimes a simple narrative to make people understand that. But I have two questions. I'm sorry, I don't remember your names. One is for you. So you mentioned political Islam, and you said you're in favor of that, or you see it as a positive thing. I'm very curious to know why. Yeah, of course. I'm curious to know why you think that's a positive thing. The second question is for you. You mentioned something about Lale Gul. I haven't read the book because it's not in English yet, but from what I've seen, it's her recounting of her life in her Muslim Turkish family within the Dutch context. And you were quick to say she's an Islamophobe. Shouldn't we, I come from a Muslim background, and I'm extremely aware of how difficult it is to criticize Muslim culture. And then you're branded immediately. So I think we also, as Muslims, need to look at that and really hold a mirror very, very close to ourselves and say, when is self-criticism Islamophobic? And I'm also very curious to know why you labeled her as Islamophobic, because that's a very big accusation. Thank you.
Maybe I can start, or? Yeah, okay. Yeah, Janneke. Sorry.
Typhoon is very eager to answer, but so am I. Thank you very much for your question. So I didn't say political Islam, because I said that Islam is political, and I think that's a good thing. So I simply think that all religions have also political aspects, and there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, as soon as you say political Islam, there's this whole discourse connected to it that is sometimes, I think, also flawed. But what I do find very important is I think it's a misunderstanding to think that religion, already a problematic term, should be limited to the private sphere. Of course, I don't think there's something like a pure Christianity or a pure Islam that is perfect and without flaw. So I'll just speak about my own tradition because that's what I know best. So Christianity is always mixed with ideology, with there are always dangerous elements in it, and there are always, I think, also positive elements in it. So it's not, also in that sense, there's no simple narrative. So when I say that religion should also be present in the political sphere, I don't mean to say because religion is perfect, so it can only be a good thing. I mean, it's very visible that it can be very dangerous. But I simply mean to say that I think, so I'm a Christian person, which means that there's no separation between who I am at home, with my partner who is not a Christian person, by the way, and the person I am as soon as I step outside. So my way of looking at the world, my thinking is shaped by that. So also my political ideas. Also, and there's nothing wrong with it, I think. Thanks for your question.
Yes, thank you for your question. Of course, when you talk about Lale Gül and the whole discussion, there's also no simple narrative in that. But why I call Lale Gül an Islamophobe, and you know, I'm totally for Lale Gül to write a book and should write more books. She's also partly a hero for me because she also described how I lived as a Muslim stuck in a house, you know, where I could not talk about, you know, sex and everything. And so there's a lot of Islamist sexism, and you know, that's totally good that she wrote this part, but in her book and also in her interviews, she says things about Muslims, and if you put that in another, you know, frame, it would be totally, you know, be seen as an anti-Semitic. One example, she goes to a shop, and in her book she writes this, and she has no money, and she wants to eat something, and then she says she wants to steal it. She wants to steal something from Dirk van den Broek, and then she says, but I wanted to do that, but I kept the urge of being Moroccan inside of me, in which she is, you know, equating Moroccan, being a Moroccan, of some Moroccanism with stealing. If she would have said this about Jews, you know what we used to call this book, but nothing happened. And if you look at her interviews also, you can see that she copy-pasted Forum for Democracy ideas about what is omvolking? You know, that the whole, that the West is being taken over by Muslim replacement, yes. And she tweeted really Islamophobic things about that, and that Muslims are making babies in such rate, and eventually Amsterdam would be a Muslim country, you know, a Muslim city. You know, this is really Islamophobic things, and we should, of course, she's young, and she is frustrated in a situation. I totally understand. I was also 16, and I said stupid things when I, you know, was in discussion with my mother, who's making Turkish pizza at this moment, and that, you know, but we should, of course, talk about this. You know, I applaud Lale when she talks about sexism and everything within this Muslim community. But, you know, if she is reproducing racist things, we should also talk about that.
This is a really interesting discussion for me, too. I guess every year I have to kind of face this kind of situation in Bangladesh. I mean, when I'm writing in Bangladesh. The same thing I have to say, like, again and again, I mean, to both groups, like, in terms of the atheists, I need to sometimes tell them what could borderline racism or move into racism, because you're angry on Islam, but sometimes you're like being too judgmental and essentializing Islam in a way that may help certain kind of discrimination in contemporary global context. There is no local and global anymore. Like some people who tell me, hey, in Bangladesh, the atheists are the minority and the Muslim are the majority, so they are the dominating group. But at the same time, there is no clear separation between the local and global political context anymore. So everybody needs to be careful, I guess. But on the other hand, like, how do we criticize the young Muslim atheist people? or like young Muslim Islamophobic people. I'm just putting the words together because that's how it can be. What the problem is, you have to also understand their anger, where it comes from. And I think it's very important, without really talking about their anger, without really talking about their suffering. I mean, listen, I'm just going to tell you one thing. The first time I became totally pissed off about Muhammad, he looked just a mullah of my village, okay? Because that's how you represent him. How am I going to like that person? I found him a dominating patriarchal guy, similar to the muezzin of the mosque, who is also a landowner, patriarchal kind of person, who created the mosque to kind of legitimize his political power. So the thing is, but when I first felt Muhammad properly and felt close to my heart, after reading Walter Benjamin, the Jewish guy who was fleeing from the Nazis and had to commit suicide because he couldn't. Then I understood Muhammad. I could feel his own struggle. I could feel the struggle of his own small community. And it opened my eyes in a completely different way, like this ontological understanding, this ontological shift. There is a blockage. How would the young Muslim people who are critical about their religious background are going to get out of that blockage? Unless you make sure that they have a way to feel.
I think the bottom line is speaking truth to power. When Islamism comes from a position of power, then you should stand with the secular people. And I stand with Lale Gül when she, criticizes that kind of, corruption, that kind of unequalness and everything. But when, Islam is speaking truth to power to people who are racist, then you should stand with Muslims who are, treated unequally, and that's the important thing. We should be, it's not simple. It's a complex thing. You can be a supporter of people who are Muslim, but in one other discussion, these Muslims can also reproducing, the language of Turkey, of Erdogan and everything. Then you should say, criticize this person, and on the other, you should defend this person. So it's a complex story, but yeah, the simple narratives are for people who are, who want to dominate.
Yeah. No, I agree, and there is no way to get out of a problem created by simple narrative by posing another simple narrative against it. And I would just, before I would ask if anybody have another question, I would just also like to add into the question that you had, like Islam is a political religion. I think the problem is not if Islam is a political religion or not. I mean, there is politics in Islam. There is politics in every single Abrahamic religion. They grew up in a certain political context. They grew up in world economy dominated by slavery. And this religion had to say something about the human condition in that situation, and also about slavery and many other things. One can say that many of the theological premises taken by Islam in the past haven't aged properly in our time, but that's mainly because there is a lack of scholarly consensus and general people's opinion about Islam and what people know. And there is also another problem that I think, like when it comes to the political face of Islam, it is dominated by ultra right-wing people. But if you ask me, I would say there cannot be like a properly right-wing politics from Islam, like using like Islam or any Abrahamic religion. If you use left-right dichotomy, they have always been left. When you look into Quran, when you look into many of political speech given by the Prophet, and also like later generations, like people like Ali, or like the anti-Umayyad revolutionaries from 632 to 750, you'd realize the whole Islam was developed with the very dichotomy of oppressed and oppressor. So, and it is very clear in Quran, God is saying that I never oppress people, people oppress people. Or if you have hadith, like, God is going to forgive everyone, but he's not going to forgive the oppressor. Only the oppressed can do that. So there is this very leftist dimension there that is not being like properly unearthed in our time. The leftists and liberals of the Muslim world, they have leave Islam to be exploited by the mullahs and the right-wing political Islamists who has less to do with Islam and more to do with the modern time. Maududi, the first ideologue of Islamism, grew up in a time when fascism was a very accepted politics, even in the West, and he copied a lot of things from fascism in his party structure. When you talk about political Islam, it is super modern. It is super influenced by like European politics of that very dangerous period of like that period of First World War to Second World War, and from that period. And we are letting those groups to say and dictate what political Islam is because we left and liberals are too afraid to touch Islam. That's just my opinion. Yeah.
I'm hungry.
So am I.
We can just finish it here. I think that would also be nice, I guess. Yeah. Okay then, thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks, Inaka, and thanks, Typhoon, and Bonna is gone. And thank everyone for being here, and New Metropolis for hosting this and making everything possible. That's all. Hopefully, we'll be in this kind of discussion again, and maybe we'll have the book fair again in Amsterdam this time.
Inshallah.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.